the ultimate secret of the JFK assassination, the JFK Tippit body swap, and the photo and X-ray swap. So the X-rays that have been presented to prove the single bullet theory, they are true because they show a skull that was shot through the head by one bullet. But that skull belongs to J.D. Tippit. It does not belong to President Kennedy. So there, in a nutshell, you have it. And as hard as it may be to believe, it takes a little time. But I have been endorsed, my theory has been endorsed by Dr. Cyril Wecht. And when I explained to him the sequence of shots back in 1999, I explained to him that the discrepancies deal with this single fact. I said that the headshot was two shots that arrived almost simultaneously, perhaps a quarter to a half a second apart. One bullet from the right of Mr. Zapruder came down at a high angle and blew open the right side of President Kennedy's skull. And immediately thereafter, the shot from the front in the grassy knoll, the picket fence area, came in, entered the open wound, passed through the right side of the brain, and blew out the patient's head. So the only way to explain the head wounds is this, a two-bullet scenario. One opens the front of the wound, the other one enters the wound and came out. And what supports this is the testimony of Dr. Carrasco, who was in the Dallas emergency room and treated President Kennedy. He was asked during the Warren Commission inquiry, they said to him, did the wound look like a wound of entry or a wound of exit? And he said, it looked like both. And when it seemed like he was describing a bullet that made a U-turn inside the head and went back out. And then that led me to study all of the reports and all of the medical material. And at the end of the conference in Chicago, when I asked that unusual question, now I had no idea that Tippit looked like President Kennedy until that time when Professor Avica gave me that information. I had only supposed that the brain had been swapped. At the end of that conference, a gentleman came over to me, Dan DuPont, in North Hollywood, California, and he said to me, Mr. Morningstar, I heard I'd like to help you. I have Tippit's autopsy report. And I said, what? How did you get that? He said, a Canadian investigator named Gary Muir went down there in 1964 and 65, and he went and he got Tippit's autopsy report, and I have it, and I'm going to give it to you. And so he sent it to me, and I started reading Tippit's autopsy report and the description of the damage to the brain. And as I was going through that, my eyes popped, because what I was reading, the description that Errol Rose gave of the damage to Tippit's brain, paraphrased what the Warren Commission autopsists told about the damage to President Kennedy's brain. The bullet passed through the same brain regions. It severed the same the hippocampus, and the trajectory was the same. But the problem.
So the idea is that this in a sense documents how well thought out this plot was.
Oh yes, absolutely. How genius, a diabolical genius, had to have conceived of all of this, but another diabolical genius in the first place had to have seen that Tippit looked like President Kennedy enough to describe them as appearing like fraternal twins. The difference between Tippit and President Kennedy primarily was above the brow, in that Tippit had darker hair, darker, wavier hair. He had a receding hairline. And this, what I'm telling you now, explains the need for those medical alterations of the body to make the hairline look like President Kennedy's, because you had a man with a receding, balding hairline, and you had a man with a full head of hair. So that's what was doctored, and that's the surgery done to the top of the skull, described by the two FBI agents who were in Dallas and who were also in Washington later and saw the body the second time. And it was obvious
Yeah.
to them, Siebert and
That's
O'Neill, that something
amazing.
had been altered.
Can you, I wonder if you would tell me, though, in terms of your analysis in what's gone on between then and now and the changing of the guard in the government, because, I know that you're aware that we have more than, a secret government, and we've got, the staged situation.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if you look at that situation from the time of the assassination, which really, to me, I always think of it as when there was, in essence, a coup d'etat, and
yes.
a different faction took over the government and basically have been in power ever since. But
yes.
they themselves are somewhat, I believe, fragmented, and that they are also fighting among themselves.
Yeah.
So
you use the word exactly as fragmented. They are fragmented because we're not dealing with the original. We're not dealing with the original conspirators and murderers. We're really dealing with their grandchildren. This bag of worms, can of worms, was handed off from one group to another as the generation passed, and there is dissension. As I said, the resources aren't there anymore. They just cannot, the lid cannot be kept on the big lie, because I like to say often the truth is seamless. It's a perfectly woven fabric. And if you take one thread of the truth and start to pull on it and tug it, it'll lead you along that thread to the crosshatch and the warp and the woof. But wherever there's been some kind of deception, they have to patch it up, and that patch stands out in the fabric of truth, you see? And the cost of keeping the cover up has grown so great it's just impossible. Now, I don't think that there has been a change of guard. I think that they have had a method for supplying the puppets, the yes men that they need to have to maintain the lid on the cover-up. And that what we have seen, the hijacking of the United States Treasury in the last year, is the culmination of the process that began there. Because the Federal Reserve had a big stake in the killing of President Kennedy. He was at war with them. He had already ordered the United States government to print out its own silver certificates. He was going on the silver. Instead of a gold standard, President Kennedy was going to go on the silver standard, and he issued $4.2 billion in silver certificate notes in June of 1963. And he had given the Fed notice that next election they were going to be replaced. And, of course, what's Ron Paul saying now? Audit the Fed. Well, President Kennedy had those ideas then. And the financiers, the industrialists, the oil people, they were against President Kennedy because he was going to get rid of the oil depletion allowance. He was a real American revolutionary. President Kennedy believed in the Constitution and constitutional law, and he was going to re-engineer the framework of our nation. So first it was him, then it was his brother, then Martin Luther King, then Allard Lowenthal, and we have lived in the age of assassination. If you go to UFO Digest, beside my work in UFOs, there's an article there called the Operation of in History. The Black Hand was a symbol of the Mafia. And I wrote up an article citing about 42 assassinations through history, because I object to the fact that conspiracy has become a dirty word. And a conspiracy theorist, is a label that they throw on people to discredit them. But what I did in this article was I rehabilitated the word. I pointed out that the word conspiracy has been in Webster's dictionary for almost 200 years, that it's been in history for thousands of years, and that in fact history began with an assassination called the assassination of Osiris. And this leads us right back to Dealey Plaza, because the murder of President Kennedy was dressed up as a religious pageant in which